Welcome.
Hello. It is another episode of Always Strikes Last. I had something better for that, and it just didn't get to me in time. It's Always Strikes Last. That's what we're doing.
We're striking last with that one as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. Striking last, but not striking out. Still connected.
There we go. As always, I'm Miles, and I'm joined by my hosts, Matt and Jack. And today we've got a special guest for you, Mick Wendel, who is co-owner of the Underworld Gaming shop in the Dublin area here in Ireland. And he recently played for Team Ireland in Six Nations. Welcome, Mick.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
Thanks
absolutely.
For coming.
So for people in the U.S., I think most of our listenership is in the U.S. Six Nations is a tournament between six nations, presumably.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah, nailed it. All right. I did all my homework before this episode.
We are the best at preparation.
It's really 5.5, but you're rounding up, right?
I see.
Yeah, we have England, Scotland, Wales, then Northern Ireland, and Norway, or Finland, or Switzerland. I'm actually not sure because I think it's changed over the years.
Okay.
There's the one.
Switzerland.
There's the one that's being rounded up. See?
Yeah.
There we go.
I always call it Scandinavia because I'm not sure. My geography is terrible.
Fair enough.
You can't go wrong with that one, though.
So yeah. So basically a team of Vikings.
Nice. Well, that's scary enough.
Yeah.
So how'd it go? Tell us about it.
Well, we didn't come last this year. That was good. That was our goal.
If you're not last, you're not last.
Yeah, we came out of COVID doing pretty poor because we just didn't play any games. Like our entire team, I think, had a grand total of maybe 5 games in 2 years. So we were, however long we were in lockdown before the previous Six Nations. So we really came into, I think it was 2021 Six Nations, feeling the skill gap. It was huge. We were just completely outclassed. So our goal this year was just to, not be that bad again. And we managed to come 5th instead of 6th, which was a win. Not coming last is always good.
There we go.
But generally just had it was a really really good 5 rounds of games for all of us.
So what did you play? What was the army of choice?
I was playing something fluffy, Daughters of Cain.
Oh, yeah, narrative.
So, I was all about the narrative. It was Marathian Cronspine. There's something to do with her having a pet Cronspine. That was my narrative.
Nobody can hear this, but I've died a little.
Yeah, I did. Now I didn't actually take Cronspine to Six Nations. I was playing. I think I had about 20 or 30 games of Cronspine and Marathi under my belt, and then the FAQ dropped. And it's not that it wasn't playable because there was another Marathi Cronspine list at Six Nations on Team England, and that went 5-0. So it's still a good list. But when you just don't feel a list, and it's just like you write it, and you're like, okay, that's there, but I don't like it anymore.
Yeah,
it wasn't there for me. So I dropped it. I took something a little bit more MSU style, a couple of units of Canary, 2 10s of each of the snakes, so like 10 combat snakes, 10 bow snakes, and then I had a hag with the Hardy Fury just to kind of counteract all the bounty hunters around because my snakes really don't like bounty hunters. So it was a good weekend in all. I absolutely threw away 2 games, which I was raging about.
Oh, that's the worst. That's the worst feeling.
I lost one pretty decisively. It was just, GG, but I threw away. My opponent won because I lost.
Yeah,
I can sympathize with that moment.
Been there.
Not to take it away from my opponents. Not to take it away from my opponents. I remember I doubled one of the lads from 2 to 3. And even his colleagues on either side of him, his teammates on either side of him, were like, "Yep, that's GG." And then at the end of the game, I'd lost. I got greedy and tried to split attacks between the Slan and some skink priests. And
splitting your attacks, it always works every single time.
Yeah, you get just the dice you need. Done.
0% of the time, every time.
Yeah.
So it was good because like you get a mixture of depending on so I suppose I'll jump into like the kind of the thought process behind team building for the or team composition for the event.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of aim to have we kind of aimed to have maybe two armies that we try and get them good matchups all the time. So they're the kind of smash armies that you want to put down. You're like, these have so many good matchups. We don't want to give them a bad matchup because it's kind of a waste. So you just try and always have two of those. So I was actually one of them with daughters because I had a lot of good matchups with them. So the guys were trying to get me. I wasn't involved with the pairings now. So the guys were trying to get me good matchups all weekend. So I think I got 4 out of 6 good matchups. And I think I won my 2 bad matchups, which was
nice.
Yeah, that's how it rolls. But, Then you kind of aim for like a couple of armies that you can kind of that are quite tanky or quite like all comers that or not even all comers, but something that can take a bit of a slap, and you might be able to fight for some points. Now the scoring system didn't really favor this tactic at this event, so like what we used to do at the old fantasy team tournaments was it'd be a scoring system, and both players start on 10 points each. And basically, how much you kill and banners you capture and all that sort of stuff would teeter it towards 20-0. So you go if I'm up by 250 points, I'd be 11-9 up. So it's not just that I win the whole game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what? And the purpose of that is if you're going into a bad matchup, you don't just throw the towel in. You don't just go for the Hail Mary pass. You don't just go for the double. You try and pull some points out of the game.
Right, to make it close.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the only problem with this scoring system is that it starts off at 15-5 if you win. So you're fighting for very few points, which is an awful pity. So people were still getting like 3 or 4 points in matchups they were losing, but they were still playing right until the end to get any points. I remember in one round we were basically just saying, right, guys, all that matters here is pulling as many points in as possible, because that's like it doesn't matter if we win or lose, we just need to score more points than another team. That was essentially our last round. So so you're playing these matchups, and it sounds like I've never played in a team event before, so it sounds like there is a captain of sorts who is trying to negotiate your matchups for the round. Sort of. You have a pairings process. So once you've got your team, you've got your 8 team members, and then you have your nominated 2 people to do matchups. And how that works is essentially both players put down an army face down, and then you flip them over, and then each team will take that and decide to put 2 other armies against the one that their opponents put down.
Okay.
So then you will then flip over the 2 armies that your opponents have put down to fight the army that you put down, and you will choose the matchup.
Interesting.
So it's I'll say it again because it isn't very straightforward, and people always get confused with this. So essentially, I put one down, my opponent puts one down, we flip them over. Then my opponent puts 2 down on top of the one that I put down, and I put 2 down on top of the one that they put down. And then each team that put down the 1 gets to choose which one of the 2 they fight. So you get a bit of a choice. But you're also, you could see what happens there is you're generally trying to put down something that has maybe a lot of good matchups or maybe a lot of bad matchups in that scenario. And you're gonna the idea there is that rather than trying to get a really good matchup for each single pairing, you're also considering, well, if I take this bad matchup, does that make the rest of our pairings process a little bit better? So taking the Seraphon player out, taking the Daughters of Cain player out, or taking the stacking Slaves to Darkness player out because nobody wants to play that. Do you know what I mean?
That makes perfect sense. I experienced this directly, but I also was confused by how it worked. I'm just going to let them steer the ship and would fight whoever they pointed me at. So
it is confusing sometimes. You have to do it a few times just to kind of get the hang of it. But so that and that kind of also helps you that also changes the meta a little bit. So you're not going to see the same lists from a singles event at a teams event, because people can go a little bit more narrow with a list. They can decide, right, I'm going to build this list to do this thing. it's really bad against these 30% of armies, but I can just avoid those matchups, hopefully.
Sure, or strategically take them because it's better for the team.
Exactly, yeah, and just go down, basically, as we call it, going under the bus, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
I really like that.
I've spent many a time under the bus.
Yeah,
I just make those lists anyways and just lose it no matter what. So
there we go.
Yeah. So you do see very interesting lists at team tournaments, because you wouldn't normally see them at singles, because if you don't build a singles list that can deal with a lot of scenarios, then you can end up losing a game just because of the mission, or just because of the your opponent had loads of monsters, or whatever the reason being. So singles list, you're looking at building all comers, things. You include things in your army where they're good in every game, they're good in every scenario, they're good against every opponent, or at least you minimize what they're bad against. Whereas in team events, you can say, I'm going to be bad in this mission, and I'm going to be bad against these things because I can avoid them.
Oh, it's the KO player's dream.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I think there was a KO player on every team.
Yeah, that checks out.
It's exactly that. Like Sylvaneth as well. Sylvaneth are a great team army. I wouldn't consider them a great singles army.
Those hard matchups makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So it makes it quite difficult. So if you can avoid the matchups, then you can play things that you wouldn't normally play. So that's kind of the pairings process, your team build up. As I said, you'll always try and have a couple of it's kind of like a sword and shield style thing. You'll have a couple of armies which are swords, a couple of armies which are shields, and then maybe a few hybrids in the middle. Or you might just go 4 swords and 4 shields, or you might go 8 swords. Whatever your direction with the team is.
There we go. 7 swords and spider goblins.
There you go. Exactly.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, so it spices things up a little bit, and it's definitely the most intense Warhammer I've ever played.
Oh, I'm sure, because every moment of it is fraught with choice and decision paralysis and strategy.
It's a very high caliber of playing. So like you're not like you absolutely cannot do any take backs, for example. You absolutely, if you make mistakes, you get punished. That's just it. It's not your mid-table games with your at your local tournament. It's really like, this, you have to be the best. And it's not about that your opponent won't give you a take back, because a lot of the time the opponents at Six Nations are very pleasant. They're not sitting there, telling you no, and they're not sitting there saying gotcha. But it's kind of bad for them to ask at such a high level event.
Sure.
So you just don't do it. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard. Like, you should hold yourself to a high standard at tournaments anyway. But I think specifically the likes of Six Nations and Worlds, those 2 particular events, because you're dealing with literally the best players of each country. So it's quite intense. But like, they're some of the best games I've ever played. And,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Nice.
Of course, it's a little tricky. It's sort of like, of course, you have to rise to that standard when it's sort of international ambassadorial stage, making sure that you're not sort of playing too loose a game. But where does that line really get drawn? It's like, did you take your hand off the chess piece level sort of oopsies, or is it more like just, clearly forecasting your intent and followed order of operations? I mean, where do you sort of find that particular level to be there at the Six Nations, Mick?
Well, the first thing is, and this goes, I suppose, for all of my games, regardless of casual pickup games or tournaments, whatever, is the conversation at the start of the game. Okay, so I'll generally always say to my opponents a few things. One of them being, if it's not flat on the mat, it's cocked. So if it rolls flat on scenery or a model's base, just re-roll it, because just that black and white approach is just so much easier.
Sure.
Nothing more infuriating than when your opponent rolls a 1, but it's on the scenery, and then he re-rolls it into a 6.
I'm also willing to let anybody re-roll a die that like fell out of their hands and they were getting their dice all together.
Oh,
like,
they're dead dice.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Fallen dice are dead dice. That's just a given. But the usual is if it's not flat on the mat, and I'll usually always say to my opponent, listen, let's just play by intent. Because I will generally tell my opponent everything that I'm planning on doing. I'll move them and say, I have moved this into within X range of this model, or I'm just within 6 inches of this objective, or, whatever. Because you know what? We're humans and we knock things constantly.
Yeah.
So if you, and the other thing as well is if I'm moving towards something and I might say to him, I'm staying outside of 9 inches because I don't want you to redeploy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he decides to redeploy, that's it. I can't do anything about that. I've seen people who kind of take back and go, oh no, I don't want you to redeploy, so I'm going to stay outside of 9. That's tough. You've now gained knowledge that I want to redeploy, so you can't change your mind. That's a really important one for me, is that, making sure people know exactly what my intentions are so that they're aware and they can react. And I'll always it's the same thing, if there's reactions that can be made, again, I always say to my opponent, I'm going to offer you the chance to do it. I'm not going to wait for you to pipe up, because you need to know when I'm finished.
No,
So,
it's like that. Do you guys ever play Magic the Gathering on online?
Oh,
So that's a game. Never online.
Never online.
Right, that's a game that's full of reactions, and I find they have to build those in the UI, and because for exactly the reason that you said, right, you can't just wait for someone to pipe up with a reaction. You need to offer them the opportunity, and so there's all of these little 3 to 10 second timers built into the game that are absolutely maddening to me when I'm trying to play online, but is incredibly important for exactly that reason.
Yep.
So I do have to ask, and this is something I run into every once in a while, because there are players that play by intent, and they state what they're going to do, but then they follow through with it and actually measure after they've done it. I've seen a lot of players play by intent and not actually go through and measure through. And I think maybe this is just myself finding one thing to be overly obsessed about. But in a game of measuring distance and movement, especially with pile-in, I found a lot of problems actually happen with that intent. Oh, it was my intent to do this. Oh, it was my intent to do that. But when the models that aren't actually moved to that nth degree, then pile-in problems happen where somebody say, oh, no, it was my intent. Oh, sorry, you can't actually get those on there because, I didn't move this model to where it needed to be to keep you off of the actual objective. It was just my intent. Now, do you find that yourself and your opponents at that level are actually moving the models out there? Because I've seen this all the way up the level.
Oh, sure.
Of people not doing that, but saying it's their intent.
I've experienced that both myself and with teammates, in that I will move something to the right point and then I will state my intent. That's my point. Because my point is not that I'm going to be sloppy with my movement and then I'm going to say, but I want to do this. So 99% of the time it'll be a case of, and I'll get to the other 1% in a second, but 99% of the time I'll move it exactly how I want to move it, state what I've done and why, and the ranges or whatever. The reason I do it is because of knocking, not because of sloppy movement and this. So that's literally the reason, because literally just knocking, sliding, if my opponent reaches across the table or if a tape measure comes back suddenly or whatever happens, you know what I mean? So it's that's my reasoning for it. The 1% of the time where I might be a bit sloppy is when we're at the end of the game, and because we're using chess clocks at the moment, I'll agree with my opponent, let's just fire this in the next 10 minutes and see what happens, and we'll just throw that. That's a dip, but that's, again, it's an agreement with your opponent about that, Sure. I'll say to him, listen, just move it, I know they're going to be in, there's no issue there, just throw them in a pile and nearby, we know there's going to be no subsequent turns. But when there's subsequent turns and when there's other consequences, you do have to move them properly. I won't accept that if my opponent says they're meant to be like that and it turns out they're miles out.
Yep.
Then come on, just be a little bit courteous, because I've actually experienced that more in 40k than I have in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, it's a big problem in 40k, but I've seen it all up and down pretty much any system where you have to measure, right? It comes down to how much time do you have and how much are you going to prioritize things.
I feel like a lot of those things come down to, moving a model and wanting two things, right? So you'll want to charge into range with some model, right? And you want to not be in range of some other model, right? So you're trying to get two things. And I will frequently say, I'll move it to where I want to. I'll try and get it to, what I think might be, get me both things. And then say, hey, my intention is to be in combat with this model. I've tried to make it so that I'm 3 inches away. But if I'm not, I'd rather be in combat than 3 inches away.
Yep. And that comes down to like the games being a conversation. So
I think that's fair. I definitely ascribe to that way of thinking, and really, the ethos of move your model accurately to the best of your ability, and then state what your intention is. Not like, have it be 4 inches off or something like that. I mean, I was just doing this the other weekend. It's like I wanted my iron guts to be 2.25 inches behind the the Noblar front line, right? But not 2.7, not 1.9, and so a little knock is what I'm protecting against, so we can call back to that if needed be. But I don't want them to be like awry from what the physical proximity really should be by too much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that would be very much like I moved my model and I didn't state the intent against the Seraphon player that I was playing. And my intent was internal, I didn't mention it. So my intent was because I had the movement, was I'm going to be within 3 inches of both of these units. And it was with a charging unit, whatever unit it was. And essentially to get my grand strat, I needed to make this charge. Of course I rolled a double 1. Okay.
Well, that's how it goes. It has to go that way.
Yeah. And I had a +1 to my charge, and I was like, oh, I'm in because I'm 3 inches away. And then my opponent measured because I didn't move. I was like, do you want to see? I basically offered, do you want to check that's 3 inches? I was 3.8 inches away or something like that. And it was my own stupidity, and I just accepted it because I didn't say it. I didn't state I'm going to move them within 3 inches or 3 inches away. And that was just my tough shit, You have to just accept when you've made a mistake.
Yeah.
That's the point of the game, So if you make mistakes, that's the reason why the other players beat you, because you've made mistakes and they haven't, or they've made less mistakes than you. So that's part of the game. So take backs, I think.
Absolutely.
Absolutely not.
So Mick, what was just to sum up the event? What was your favorite match of the weekend?
Oh, favorite match of the weekend. I had a really good matchup against the I'm going to say Swedish player because I'm pretty sure it's the Swedish colours on the jersey.
Okay.
We had a great matchup. I'm just trying to remember. Now I'm fried because I've only had 2 hours sleep with the child. It was my first game, I think, if I remember correctly, and that was a lot of fun. It was very, very kind of like tooth and nail. And the start of that game, he was playing Legion of the First Prince or Slaves to Darkness because he had Bellicor, and I'm trying to remember which one it was. But at the start of that game, I made a huge mistake, which essentially, because I kind of keep track of the things that would have affected that in my head, essentially the mistake I made cost me my chance at winning the game. Not cost me the game, but cost me the chance at winning. Because I'm not going to say by doing that I would have won the game. What I'm saying is if I'd have done that, I would have been in with a much better chance to win the game. So basically, I basically forgot to cast Heart of Fury on turn 1, and as a result, some bounty hunter unit came in and murdered some snakes. And he was also able to drop Bellicor into a little hole that I left, which I wouldn't have left if the Heart of Fury was there. And that single thing, not casting Heart of Fury, was literally the thing that cost me my chance at a shot at the game. So, but it was a really good game because it literally was like 5 full turns of slaughter, 5 full turns of me trying to kind of pull it back and really like play against a very good player.
Sometimes those are the best, where you're just like clawing the entire time.
Yeah, like they were all like, it was 5 great games, and that's why it's quite hard to decide which one is the best. But I just remember that particular game was just 5 turns, like the Seraphon game as well, and I lost both of these games, and yet they're probably 2 of my favorite ones. But the Seraphon game again was just a really good game. My opponent was just a really solid player, and we just had it was just really good games. Like everyone was a solid player, but just that game was a standout for me. And I think I got his jersey actually. We swapped jerseys on the Sunday.
Nice.
Oh, that's awesome.
Got the shirt off his back.
Yeah.
I love those clawback games because those are always the one where your opponent, like, not always, but every once in a while, you'll get a couple of those games where like your opponent's like, yeah, I've got this in the bag. And then you just start pulling back. And you get to watch that fun little concern on their face grow a little bit more. And, That's
Like
when
a
you're like,
sweet
oh,
nectar.
maybe I'm a sadist. Okay.
Yeah.
Considering I just called this sweet nectar and generally play Hedonites, I think I am.
And I suppose
So,
the other
Jack,
thing just to mention, so I suppose just to not to take too much time on the 6 days. The other thing to mention about team events is we do have there is another member of the team which is not a player actually, and it can be up to 2 players usually. We usually we had a coach this year. We haven't had one before because we didn't have the team. But basically, what the coach does is help us with the matchups and does all the admin in between during the round and in between rounds. And we'll kind of go across every 20 minutes periodically and ask the players, how are we getting on? You know, just to get a gauge of what's going on. Because what the coach can do then is call timeouts once per game. Each round, he can call a timeout, a 3-minute timeout with the player. And if he's going to lose, but we're already losing across the board, let's say we need 1 win just to kind of to win the round, you might say, if there's any chance of winning, don't worry about clawing 1 or 2 points, try and get the win. So he might push a player to go get the Hail Mary pass because we're kind of like, we might be 4-3 down. And if he loses this one, we'll be 5-3. But if he's able to pull it back,
then you're 4-4, yeah.
Exactly. So and that's quite big. So the coach is an interesting role. We had our first coach this year, and sometimes the captain can be non-playing as well. So you might have between 8 and 11 players on it.
Well, that's great. That's very cool. I love that. So it definitely really brings the team mentality into what is otherwise a very solo sport.
Indeed.
That's very generous of me.
Yeah.
Sport. But pivoting a minute, let's hear, Jack, you went to Everwinter this weekend in Boston. How did that go?
It went really well. I mean, it was a lot of fun. You know, I didn't cover myself in, an incredible amount of glory, but it was really great to get out there.
A modicum of glory.
Had a lot of fun. Got to catch up with some folks I hadn't seen in a while. Got to, have some good games, get some great opponents, 5 out of 5 opponents, great to play against. So, wouldn't change anything about that. It was simultaneously a bit of a knock in the rust stuff journey for me, I'd say, because I really hadn't done any tournaments at all with the new GHB. So it was like, oh yeah, here are the tricks, learned 1 game at a time. To say
yeah. Here are the tricks, and here's a whole slew of rules that nobody uses.
It's so true. A couple of themes before I get into some of the nitty gritty details that were, fun things to just kind of reacquaint myself with. There was how models can count as a lot of things, when they're expert conquerors, and you just kind of have that mental register of like, oh yeah, I got this one. There are 1 or 2, but they're really 6 because of the 2 bases or whatnot. And that came up a couple of times where I had to kind of reorient my thinking. And then the Proving Grounds was very interesting because when that's in full play, right, you have to really start thinking about when you take control of an objective, right? Because it's always end of turn. And if you just can't touch it, with whatever you have there, it can sort of stay in enemy hands a bit longer if that's still used cannily, which would come up for me because ogres like to, double turn and maintain priority, throughout the fighting after that first round, which sort of brings me to, my attempt to find thematic immortality, which I mentioned a bit in our last podcast, but this particular event, 100-player event, solo 5-round GT, there were 11 Ogre players, and there was 1 Thunder Tusk, which I brought because it's the Everwinter. For almost no better reason. Thank you. I'll take that one. I'll take that one as some sort of special internal prize. But it was a lot of fun to try to pilot that thing, and I did get to live the dream a couple of times because the list I'd brought to kind of call back to last episode was primarily based around getting 4 mortal wound charges off of Ogre units. So, I had a couple units of Iron Fists. I had like 1 sort of Frost Lord to romp around. I had a Tyrant with Brawler Guts. I had some Malbars and such. Really only 1 Iron Blaster, not like a lot of, the specifically called out great stuff right now. And I was using it to kind of get people in combat on my terms and kill mortal wounds, and I couldn't win it outright. And it was honestly a lot of fun. Ended up playing Night Haunt a couple times, One time, it was a pretty close game against Nate Trentinelli, really good guy. I was my first game, so I kind of was remembering a few things. And I made a couple key errors, but went well. He ended up beating me. Moved on to the second game. Second game was probably the one I had dreamed of in my head with this list, where I was playing against a guy with some blood tufts, for the Oryx. So a lot of piggies.
Nice.
And a Maw Crusher, a lot of people chanting in the background. And first turn, gave him the first turn. He charged right up against the Noblar screen and was summarily executed with a unit of 6 piggies by some Iron Guts. And then I just had a great old time with the next 2 turns. I got a double. I made a bunch of charges. Mortal wounds were head. By the bottom of turn 2, the entire rest of the board was cleared. So I sort of max pointed that and moved on.
It feels bad to cheer against the Orc player, but I think you did a good job.
Thank you. It just the whole time.
Destruction player.
Yeah. When destruction fights destruction, no one wins. I mean, we have to come up from
everybody wins.
Yeah, I was about to say everybody wins in a destruction army. That's just double the destruction.
Well, we did get to fight, and everyone was happy. So I guess it is a win-win in that regard.
Those Orcs died doing what they loved.
That's right. You can't fault them for it.
Jack, are you having a lot of fun with the Cowitzer?
Oh, the what now, Mick?
the Cowitzer. It's the name that one of our local lads has given to the Frost Lord on Stonehorn with the unstoppable charge.
I love it. Yeah, he's my absolute favorite. We had a couple nicknames for that, in the tournament. One was Bamaland. It was another Ogre player from Maine who would just say that every time he get that monstrous action off, and he'd just do some ridiculousness. And I would just call it the romp around. I just imagine a giant puppy playing with the rest of the army, leaping about.
I got really excited when someone called it the Cowitzer.
That's great.
The
Cowitzer is precious.
TO of the Exploding Dice tournament I was at there a couple of weeks ago. Pete Pratt, he's the one that came up with it in the chat, and I was just like, "That's it. That's his name forever now."
I gotta steal that now because that is perfect. There were definitely a couple times where I would get the strategically expected. I would think well-heeled usage of a 7 or an 8 or 9 or a 10-inch, romp around, and I'd get ready to go. But there were a couple times I got a 17, and it was just bananas.
Yeah. The amount of unpredictability that puts into Ogres now is just insane because they're not an unpredictable army, right? By definition, you know what they're going to do. They're going to throw vultures at you. They're going to hit you with something. Now they're going to if somebody is going to bring a Thunder Tusk, somebody's going to fight last, right? Mm-hmm. You can screen them out. You're going to take mortal wounds on the charge. But the fact that they can just move over now and just say, okay, yeah, I'm going to kill that character that's buffing your chaff here. Well, it's so amazing. It provides an unpredictable, just level of tactics.
It's not a precision, kind of squishy duelist character somehow getting back there. It's the Cowitzer. It's literally 18 tons of muscle and frozen teeth or whatever horns it has.
Whatever those things are made of,
right back there.
Everyone knows that you always put your tasty stuff at the back of the board or protected by your screens. And now all of a sudden you've got a 14-inch, potentially 17-inch moving Stonehorn crashing into the front lines and then jumping over them 3d6. So you've got 2 options. Either you don't put your screens within charge distance of them turn 1, which means you're backlining your army or hoping that you outdrop them so that you can, strategically position the rest of your army, or you put them forward, but you have to put ranks of dudes behind them so he has nowhere to land. When you're rolling 3d6, averaging 10, 11 on dice, but I've spiked I in 2 consecutive turns I rolled a 14 and a 16. I remember charging into the bottom right hand corner of the board, in the middle of the board. He was a character on an objective, murdered that character with mortal wounds, and then yeeted 16 inches across the board into a combat with horrors. And then next turn, because he pulled me out of combat, I charged, and then another 14 inches over the entire combat into a character that was going to summon next turn and murdered him too. But I traveled from one side of the board to the other with 2 charges.
Oh, yeah, I know. And Mick, you have to answer this question on that. If you were to rate how fun that is from a 0 to 10, is it a 10 or an 11?
It literally turned up to 11. Like, is the best shit ever, because I've been sick of all the other army. Like, I've been playing Daughters of Cain, so I'm not gonna lie about jumping on something that wins for a while. But I've been sick of everyone else having the tricks and the stuff that makes their armies go boom. Seraphon being a big one, like even having Marathi unkillable, like having the unstoppable charge to charge Marathi, do 3 mortal wounds for her, and then yeet into some snakes.
Yeah,
has been fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
You almost kind of need to bring one of those. I mean, just because it's so much utility and so much fun. I was definitely happy I had him on hand.
And it's not like you weren't going to bring a stone, like a Stonehorn anyway, right? So it's like it's hardly attacks.
Yeah, and it just opens up a lot of options, right? It's like other versions of Foot Ogres have a lot of shooting. It's like someone screens you a little bit right, you're done. Depending on what they have in their army.
Exactly.
But this stops that from being quite so much a final sentence. Because I did find, and this is sort of an interesting theme of my progression, is I had a lot of fun setting up screens and protecting my units with the Noblars and all that, but I didn't have quite enough shooting to really force them to come to me. So definitely times it was like, all right, little goblin men, get out of the way. The adults have to go do the fighting now because they weren't taking the bait, and it was fine. But I can definitely see how the synergy of making them need to get to you because of like 4 Iron Blasters is so devastating versus the sort of semi-optional version when you're a bit fightier. Like the opponent I had on third round was a great guy playing Stormcast, and he perhaps unwisely, I'm not sure how it exactly would have worked out, but was trying to translocate a unit of 2 dragons right in front of the army.
Oh, like you do, yeah.
Yeah, which I was actually sort of positively hoping for. I mean, he got the double 1, and he didn't do it. And so then it was sort of like the whole army was in the backfield, and I quickly had to sort of move up. There was no other option because he had 6 long strikes and some other things. It was that feeling of, all right, well, I got to get to you now. This is not going to go the other way. Of course, there was a happy ending to that story because what do we call it, Mick? The Cowitzer. The Cowitzer did its thing, managed to do a charge into a unit and then romp around over the long strikes and kill them all. No, no stand and shoot there.
Beautiful
shenanigans.
Yeah.
I love that. That is some like I feel like it's the new Fasten Maw Crusher.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, in a way.
Like just the extra movement, and it just instills this like primal terror in all of these sort of more like armies that rely on precious little heroes in the back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or just Death Star units. Death Star units that need a turn or 2 to kind of like really just like spool up, right?
Yeah.
And it's so nice. Plus, there's a lot of just really weird utility you can do with that thing.
It's very good. It's gonna. I'd say it's gonna be in every like competitive ogre army because it's just it. As you said, it's utility. Being able to, it forces people's deployments to be different. You can't just deploy normal. As I said a minute ago, you can't just screen at the front anymore and just go, you can't have your 450 point model jump over. Now I can. So you have to be so careful there. Like I think my opponent left a Gotrek in the middle of the board because he was like, come fight me. And I was like, all right, charge, and then launch over and charge into the Sylvaneth army behind him. Killed a bunch of bugs and stuff like that. But he made the mistake of putting Gotrek within charge distance, and then I 3d6'd into, I had a choice of bugs or the Sylvaneth, the hunters. So I went for the bugs, the squishier target. But those things you can't do anymore. Like I always put Marathi and Kronspine in the front lines when I was doing it, literally so far forward that you couldn't miss them. But I won't do that against a Frostlord because he'll just go, right, hit Marathi, and then I'll unstoppable charge into whatever's behind her, because usually it's one of the unit's snakes.
It's so true. It's almost like that unit up front becomes like that handhold for their acrobatics or their parkour to get to the rest of the stuff.
The springboard.
Yeah.
I just love the idea of the narrative moment in that, where like this unit, whatever it is, maybe it's Marathi, maybe it's Gotrek, maybe it's just some Noblars, and they're like expecting the charge, and they're like, hold, right? And then the Frost Lord just comes tunneling, like barreling past, like okay, is he gone? Like,
I just have such a mental image of when you get that 15 or 16 or 17 inch romp around, Cowitzer moment of like a hunter or someone else like really grizzled from the ogre army, just like reaching into his big cloak and pulling out like this giant femur-sized bone and just tossing it deep in the enemy army, and like the eyes of the Thunder Tusk just fixating on it, then it's go time.
See, it's funny because I had the idea of just like a bouncing ball, right? Like, but ogres are much more serious. But I could imagine when you roll that 17, it's the Stonehorn tripping and just like rolling head over foot, and that's why it has to fly, right? So it just bounces over. I'm painting far too many squigs right now. Yeah. So you know where my mind's at.
Totally fair. Well, I won't only leave you guys in too much suspense over the rest of the tournament. The rest was a lot of fun. Didn't end up getting too great result. I think it was like a 2-3. Probably should have been a 3-2, but for some dumb mistakes I made at the end. And it was a great old time. I was thinking about it when you were mentioning, Mick, some of your experiences, but I definitely had one of those moments where I was thinking of something, and hindsight is 20/20. But I was telling myself as I was about to make an action, "Don't do this thing. This is the bad idea." And I did that thing, and it ended up costing me the game pretty decisively with a 6-point swing, without much else could have impacted it, because it was the difference between my grand strategy being made and their grand strategy being made, and it was just that.
Rip.
Yep. And as a good reminder to don't do those things.
Absolutely. I will say though, there's an unsung hero in the ogre book, which I don't know if it's never going to show like as much as the Frost Lord or 4 Iron Blasters, but the Blood Pelt Hunter is an absolutely fantastic unit.
Oh, I had one unassembled, but I've been thinking about him. Yeah, he seems really cool with some of that utility and trickery you could do.
Yeah, he's just brilliant. I played Daughters of Cain in round 5 at the recent tournament, and I went up and I threw all his attacks at Marathi, did 3 damage. Marathi charged him. I did 3 damage, and that killed him. But 6 damage by the end of turn. Sorry, I'd Iron Blasted him to the previous turn, so I'd done 9 damage by the time Marathi became relevant. And then finally charged the Stonehorn in to do the last 3 wounds, and then unstoppable charge into snakes. He's just such a brilliant thing. And Marathi couldn't do anything about him because she couldn't see him because he was in cover.
Oh.
I placed him kind of away from anything relevant, away from objectives, away from my army. So it was kind of good in that way. I use Frost Sabres in pretty much all of my lists. I actually didn't have any Nobblers in mine, so that's another particularly fun utility units that you can't see, so they have to come at you.
And those new chameleon skinks are going to be the same way, I think. We'll see.
But they're very expensive.
Oh yes, they've always been very expensive.
Yeah,
both
the models.
In the cash wallet, the cash monies, and the and the points.
To be so again, amazing.
Well, I got that new Warcry box, and those models are beautiful. Man, are they a pain? The little what do you call them? The things that spit the poison. Yeah, blowpipes. Yeah, those are. I almost broke like 5 of them.
Interesting design choice and how to make that
no, it's
painful and scared or simple thing.
No, it's just the thin plastic, like they are not even going to touch a dry brush. So
fair enough.
Sometimes you miss metal models. Sometimes you miss them.
There we go. Well, I think we've come to a good place, and that might be all the time we have for this episode. What do you guys think?
I think so.
Good. We talked a lot about ogres. I'm happy.
Yeah, there we go. I think it's a win all around.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Mick, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, and everyone check out Underworld Gaming if you're in the Dublin area.
Yeah, definitely. It's awesome.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Mick.
No problem, guys. Anytime.
Yeah, and everyone else, keep striking last.
Yeah, that sounds. It sounds like a tagline.
Yeah,
It's
strike
fine.
hard, strike last. Is this like a Cobra Kai thing I'm stealing? I don't know. Something.
I don't know.
When you strike last, you're
It's because there's a thunder tusk in front of you.
yes.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
Woo!
We made it.
Those are the Cowitzer and the Cowitzer strikes last.
Yeah.